So they're
Gotta pay raise.
Yeah, right. And
No, that's right. We're a tough crowd.
Terry and Adeline now are on the committee. So what Terry says now has as much or more impact as it used to.
Much or less.
Yeah. So we'll get started. And I see the first thing is a Zoom etiquette reminder. Help me with that. I don't know what that means.
That means a few things. One, try not to shuffle your papers around for people online. Two, if you are online, to be identified and have your camera on if you're part of this board. If you're not, you can hide behind your camera, but if you are a voting member of the board, you have to have your camera on. You have to be clearly labeled that it is you, and a quorum has to be in the room in order for anybody online to vote.
Okay. We do
Am I
have a
forgetting
quorum.
anything? That's pretty
Yeah,
much it.
it's just a lot of the fidgeting and stuff.
Yeah,
Or
fidgeting
side
is,
conversations, because that all
Right.
picks up on the microphone.
So the microphones are very touchy.
And privilege of the floor. So does anybody want to say anything? Anyone on the Zoom call need to say anything?
Not yet.
We don't
Okay,
have
so then we'll start by talking about the update to Town Code, Chapter 174, Subdivision of Land. I see on here that we don't have an approval of the prior meeting minutes. Do we need to do that? Unfortunately, I didn't get a chance to read them yesterday. But do we need to approve the prior meeting minutes?
Yes,
Should.
we should do that.
Okay. Has anybody else read them?
I looked at them this morning.
Yeah, so why don't we hold on that
We
until
can
next
hold off.
meeting
It
then?
was very detailed. It looked like Kim did a nice job.
So we'll add that to the next agenda. We can do 2 sets of meetings.
We'll do 2 sets of meeting minutes. And I think, Kim, if you could get those out just a wee bit earlier, that would be helpful. Has anyone had a chance to review, or does anyone have any comments about the updated Code 174 subdivision of land?
I have comments.
Please.
I drafted it and it's not good enough.
Me,
Well, now we adjourn.
All right, that's it. We'll see you next one.
Oh, my goodness. You guys. Once we,
There's a hiccup.
Well,
there's a couple of hiccups, but once we start digging into these things and then you start referencing in other sections of code and then you start finding other things, I think there's a couple of different things. I think the gist of it, and I was trying to keep it super simple, right? And make it easy to follow. There's a couple of things. Number one, there's a section of the Town Code, Chapter 220-9, which is applicable to all districts.
I'm sorry, I didn't get that. Applicable to what?
Chapter 220-9, it's applicable to all property in the town of Canada,
Yep.
regardless of the zoning district. There's a specific section in 220-9C. It says every developed lot of record shall have access to a public street. Access may be either direct or by private road or drive. All structures shall be so located on lots as to provide safe and convenient access for servicing, fire protection, and required off-street parking. Further standards may be found in town of Canada site design development criteria. So that gets at the interpretation I filed with you guys last week, but
Yeah, I just, you're right. I thought that
but
too.
clearly this says you can subdivide along a private drive. Applicable to all zoning districts. So I think we may want to, I don't know if we need to tweak this to mirror what we're trying to do, I think. And I think the gist of what we were trying to do is saying you can subdivide 3 lots or less, right? 3 lots or fewer along the private drive, which is fine. But once you get to that fourth lot or more is the gist of what this document that we drafted up. This probably needs to be updated, this chapter of 220-9 to also reflect that, or at least reflect this chapter so that it's clear. That's what we're trying to do.
Well, doesn't 220-9 say that you can subdivide? And then 174 would tell you how to subdivide.
Essentially,
Kind of, yeah.
yes. But this really, so it says access may be either direct or by private road or drive, but there's no definition of drive. I don't even know, is there a definition?
Well,
of
that's the
private
thing.
road? I
No,
don't think so. So,
private driveway is not defined. Private drive is not defined. Right.
So we either
yeah,
need to define,
reference-
we either need to define those terms or change the
new.
terms in 220.
Correct.
Yeah,
In 220.
We have defined.
Yeah.
we need, you're right.
So
That's
the
what we
other
want to
thing,
do. Mhm.
since,
Yeah.
the other thing that has happened since our last meeting, and this is just driving me absolute bonkers. In our town code as of today, there is no definition of major subdivision or minor subdivision. Now, I don't know if it was taken out. Tom, remember when we did that thing with Canandaigua Lake Watershed Council and that subgroup? I found a document that referenced a definition of major and minor subdivision by the town of Middlesex, and it references the town of Canandaigua and you and me.
That's
But-
a squeeze. It's got
I mean,
drifted off of my
right,
brain.
that was like, that had to have been like 2015, 16.
Long time ago.
Something or other like that, but the gist of it is our town code today doesn't have that in that anymore. Or it doesn't ever. I don't know which.
We
Was that
did.
when we went to the single stage subdivision? Remember, it was always preliminary final?
Right, it was always preliminary final.
And then we decided, okay, well, there's certain situations, and maybe that's when you did away with minor subdivisions. You said you could have a single stage subdivision.
I don't know, but it seems like
1600s.
if we're gonna do this in our intent, we've got to also define that. And then the on-site law for the sanitary sewer, that's the other thing that concerns me, because we've always said 4 lots or more, major subdivision needs sanitary sewer. I can't find that in the code anymore. So I feel like I'm chasing a rabbit down a hole here, but
It doesn't have a bottom.
If I could, to back up even more troublesome, when I'm reading this stuff last night. It's, when I'm reading, I see a term and I say, okay, is that defined? Is that it defined in our code? I wish that we could persuade whoever publishes our code to italicize or bold things that are defined in the code, so you can click on it and see the definition. Because if you're reading this, you don't know whether a private drive or a private driveway are different definitions, for God's sakes. And it makes you crazy.
Mhm.
Are you reading what's commonly accepted usage or a defined usage? And it's maddening. And
we've asked that company that question. You brought that up before. We've asked them
yeah.
many times. And to this point, what the response has been is that their system is not set up to do that currently. That's general code. They are the largest municipal code in the world.
But it'd be
And
so
they're
good for
international.
everybody.
It would be, but I think their system, the way they explained it is it would be so challenging for them to actually do that into their system, the way it's set up. I don't know. There's
With
something. that
computers,
they're
you'd think it'd be a no-brainer.
Probably it's a question of where you begin and end. I mean, what's division mean?
Well, if it's
Does that
not,
have to be
if it's not
defined? You know, I mean,
defined, then you go to the dictionary or commonly used,
I know,
commonly
but
accepted usage. But if we've gone to the trouble to define it in our code, it should be somehow identified so that you and I can click on it. Okay, what is a private driveway as opposed to a private right of way or whatever it is that we're referring to?
Or just go to the definition section of the code and should have it listed.
Yes,
Well, they are,
it
but-
absolutely should be, and
But you have
you
to
should
keep
be able to click on it and it bounce you right over to definitions.
But now you got to flip back.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and if you know it's defined,
Well, yeah,
and we don't know, just reading along, which makes me,
So.
Welcome, Madeline.
Hey, I've been hanging out for a bit. Do we want to define the driveways and the private roads then? I mean, that sounds like something
we
we
do.
talked
we
about
do.
last month's meeting for a long
But
time.
the intent is still to do the 4 lots or more. We're gonna have to bring you back a revised draft ordinance, because this just isn't gonna work.
well, in this that we have today in front of us, there is private drive is defined.
Right.
I mean, that's in
Yeah.
there.
Right.
But
And if we're all in agreement with that concept, I think we should work whatever it takes back through the code to
Yeah.
allow us to
that's what happens. when
3
you
or
open
less,
up.
3 or less common, shared, private, whatever you want to call it.
Right.
4 or more would be a public street.
Right.
And I think that's,
So I had one idea that I just wanted to bounce off everybody. Which is what's magical about the number 3? It seems like we're going from a very loose code to something that is very restrictive. And I just wondered whether 3 is the appropriate number or whether we should loosen that up a little bit. I'm just throwing it off for conversation.
Let's talk about that for a second. So, New York State Department of Health regulates 5 lots. Once you get to 5, then it's essentially a major subdivision, and then there's all kinds of stuff from a New York State Health perspective. The definition of major and minor subdivision that I know I didn't dream it, was 4 or more. And I actually was able to look there because it is in the current town of Middlesex code still. It says major subdivision, any subdivision of a parent parcel of land into 4 or more lots, including the parent parcel, or any subdivision requiring any new public street, road, or extension of municipal facilities would be a major subdivision. The minor subdivision is any subdivision of a parent parcel of land into 3 lots, into no more than 3 lots, including the parent parcel and not previously classified as a major subdivision.
So New York State Department of Health classifies 5 or more.
Department of
Yes.
Health classifies 5. or
And,
more.
and you're also going to put some verbiage in here about sanitary.
Yes, we need to.
So I guess I will ask the question, should we be consistent with the New York State Department of Health and go with 5? And again, it's just for conversation. I don't see this happening very often anyways. But we are going from very restrictive to, or very loose to extremely restrictive.
And as a follow-up, how many pre-existing non-conforming do we have?
Oh,
If it's 3 or 4?
too many to ever
Lots.
consider.
many.
I can't even imagine how many.
So John's proposal
But they're
might
well-
diminish the number of pre-existing non-conforming.
If we had a way to track that.
You'd have to look. Research.
Do we have any,
Hard to do that.
do we have any understanding or reasoning why we took that definition off the books? Were there resos passed explaining why we did that?
No, we can't find anything at all. So I have no idea. I've been searching for all week.
That's been 3 and the numbers 3 and 4 were there when I was on the planning board and 15 years ago.
Yeah.
I thought it was, and I
I know.
hadn't looked for it, but
I think the higher the number of lots on a private street would increase the chance of conflict among residents. I've lived this horror, and if you have 2 people sharing a driveway or common area, it's not too bad, but 3, 4, you get up to 5, 6, 7, now you get the chances of a conflict occurring. So I think it's from my standpoint, I think 3 is probably the right number. Anything more than that, you're running the risk of a range war out there.
Well, we're talking about one potential additional unit, right? We're going forward to be consistent with the Department of Health. or what was it? The department.
Yeah, that's Department of Health.
Does it raise any questions with those inconsistencies that we have now, the situations that exist now, the non-conforming, pre-existing? I mean, if we change it now, does that bring somebody back that says, hey, you made me do this? I don't know. I'm just raising that as a question.
In the standards that you did 3 or 4 or 5 years ago, construction standards, do we have a standard for a private drive or a private driveway?
We have a typical section of the private driveway as far as it's, you know, it's what dimensions it would have in terms of its width, the gutters and.
And how many pre-existing, whether they're non-conforming or conforming, in terms of number of dwelling units, live up to the standards in terms of
Oh, very
width?
few.
So we got
Yeah.
the double whammy there.
Yeah.
So
Well,
And the other
yeah,
thing,
and then
which
bringing
is-
back, we are requiring them to bring them up to code once they come in.
and the other thing we did,
driveways.
That's
If
how we.
how do you
we
do
found
that?
it. I
And
mean,
if it's by the right of way that was the classic is Ananda there.
Yep.
Mhm.
If their right of way is really only 12 feet and it's supposed to be 20 feet hypothetically, how do you, after the fact, engineer that? Or
Well, I'm thinking of
Mandate that.
Menteith, Sarah Linda's property, that
yeah.
driveway. The threshold, they hit the 50% threshold for,
That was more of a fire code.
that's a
Well,
fight, so
that's a
fire
fire
code
code
kicks
issue.
in at that point.
yeah, but they own both sides of the easement or the right of way. I know now that you've got differing people fronting on the common drive or driveway.
Are you talking about on a lake?
Anna Linda,
Anna Linda,
yeah, I'm
yes.
sorry.
Yeah.
Run,
Yeah, I
Wrong
get what you
Indian.
meant.
Same old.
So-
and I think the other thing we did, Chuck, we talked about making sure that there is an agreement
Oh, yeah.
amongst
Oh,
all the
absolutely.
How many
landowners,
you
right?
that's the class.
No matter how many you have, right?
For sure.
So, again, I don't know if one unit makes a difference if there's an agreement on how they're gonna maintain the roadway, but again, it's just for conversation, that's.
But I did put that into this, that access may either be direct or by private road or drive and shall include a recorded easement so as not to create a landlocked parcel, so that
Right.
that's in there.
That's good, but the only thing I thought, Doug, was maybe that provision should be in the definition, not in that particular private regulation. When you talk about private right-of-way land owned by a non-public agency, and then also, and shall include a recorded easement as to not create a landlocked parcel. That was the only thought I had on that.
Instead of put in.
Instead of- So this would essentially be every developed lot of record shall have access to a right of way.
Mhm.
Access may either be directed by private road or drive. And then you would go to the definition of private road to see as part of a private road should include a recorded easement so as to not create a landlocked parcel.
We can, whichever.
So add the easement into the
Move that back to
definition.
the definition of private right of way. That any private right of way has to include a recorded easement as to not to create a landlocked parcel.
Going back to the conversation about 3 or 4.
Yep.
If someone wanted to create a family compound, and I think one of our residents is attempting to do that now, and they had more than 2 children, they'd have to go to a road that meets town standards. And that just seems a little restrictive to me, particularly when now it's a neighborhood could be created with a road that is not up to public standards if it's greater than.
It's not gonna stay that way, though.
What do you
People
mean?
don't stay in houses all forever.
Yeah.
I mean, it'll
Right,
change over. in
it'll
time.
change, ownership will change.
So, at that point in time, then you start getting phone calls here, how come you don't plow this road for me?
Or
I
how'd
mean,
you
that-
let that happen?
Well, then we refer them to the easement, right?
I don't see any reason to change it, any compelling reason to change it myself. So.
Change it from what it is
To
now
five-
or,
to 4 and 5.
Three to
oh,
four.
oh,
Our
yeah.
real or imagined 3 or 4. Whatever.
As
I-
long as we're consistent.
I would rather leave it at the 3 than the 4, just because eventually the more people involved, the more potential problems there are. Again, it'll start out as a family compound, but people die, move, divorce.
Yep.
And then there's a skirmish that they call up the town board and say, how did you guys let this happen? Or I hate my neighbor and he won't kick in on the plowing or whatever the hell it is,
Take
and he
this
won't
road-
talk to me.
Take this road
So-
over.
I have a question. Are we talking about 3 or 4 for private driveway or private drive? And have we defined those 2 terms?
We have,
Yes,
So which one are we talking about 3 or 4 with? Private driveway?
well, the way we're theoretically talking about doing this is setting it up so that any subdivision greater than 3 would have to build a road which meets town standards.
Okay.
In the simplest of terms, right? I mean, I think that's what we're.
Yep.
Yes,
absolutely.
So that would disallow your, like several of the roads we talked about last time, Shauna, that are in my neighborhood, for example, that type of a thing.
In the future,
Yeah.
Yes, going forward.
right,
Like
like
Beacon Hill.
Beacon Hill, yeah, and then the one right across.
Unless the developer, the applicant either got a variance or the planning board waived it.
right,
Well,
right,
Right.
which would have to be extenuating circumstances, which the developer would have to prove to the board, either board.
So in the case of the family compound, maybe you can make a case why you should get a variance to do that.
Potentially, sure.
But in something like Beacon Hill, like if Beacon Hill came before the board today, they would have had to have, basically all they needed to do was to make that a full cul-de-sac with a circle, correct? In order to have met the town code.
Adeline, if that came before the board today, even if this was in place, I don't think there would be any change because that was a conservation subdivision in Lakewood Meadows. And the planning board could just approve that when they're approving that. So
Okay,
So is there,
And we're talking about lots, not dwellings. I'm thinking
lots?
compound in front of me, they've got 8 dwellings and 1 driveway,
In one lot?
and 1 lot, yeah.
So it's all 8 properties are owned by a entity.
Corporation. Yeah. So that wouldn't apply then. It would be lots, not dwellings.
Lots.
not units.
At least 8.
So then do we need to have any further conversation with this topic? Or Doug, are you,
no, Sean and I can work on some changes to
There's
this.
a few
and
semantics.
There's some things that we've got to go through with this.
it sounds like you got in.
That,
Yeah, we
that
have to mention.
174.7 general procedure, which I guess is, how much power does the planning board have regarding providing waivers? And I never felt, I don't think the code allows for the planning board to waive or give relief to any zoning issue, anything in section 220.
I think somewhere there is a general dispensation for the planning board to grant waivers, isn't there?
I don't know if
Doug?
there is, it
There's
should be
three.
in there.
There's 3 different sections. I've been talking to Nadler a lot about this. There's 3 different sections of the code that talk about waivers for the planning board. One section, it is crystal clear that it is the site design criteria. And then when you look up that, the site design criteria, so like for instance, in chapter 174, there's a section called site design.
Mhm.
And there's a question about whether or not that's been interpreted to mean that the planning board can grant waivers under anything under site design. But when you look at the site design criteria in the code and the definition of that, it's very specific to the manual that you updated. That the planning board absolutely has the authority to waive and grant relief for any of that stuff
Right.
on those things. But then there's another section on the procedural requirements, which is the section that's quoted here. And then there's another section that actually talks about more general type stuff. And it's not clear. It really isn't. You could argue it any number of different ways. And I think that it would be good for the ordinance committee to give some direction that we could get something, in front of you for what it is that you're looking to do. What should the planning board have the authority to waive?
Well, we have the conservation subdivision, which gives us.
Conservation
Yeah,
subdivision,
that's
set that
something
aside
separate,
because that
okay.
gives you broad,
And with the scenic view shed,
right?
it allows us to.
There's no guidance from the state.
Underlying
though,
zoning
from,
is.
Well, so it's
The
the
authority that each of these.
state law says if empowered by the town board obviously empowers by town code. And so our town code has 3 different sections on waivers. That's, I think, one of the challenging pieces here.
Grabbing that handful of smoke.
It's exactly what it is, Terry.
I think it will make it much easier for Sean when she does a zoning determination. If it's anything in section 220 and it's a violation or any waiver requested there, it gives it to ZBA.
Right.
And if it's in 174 or any other thing, then it's.
So let me just use an example, flag lot. Does the planning board have the authority to waive the creation of a flag lot?
Does 174 allow for a lot, to subdivide a lot with access to a public street, no matter what that width access is? If it doesn't, then.
So here's where you get into semantics, right? So 174 subdivision of land talks about the minimum lot width, right? So that's clearly chapter 220 zoning, that it has to have X number,
220,
right?
yeah, 225.
174.19, which is actually under the design standard section, is actually where you find lot size and arrangement, and the whole piece that says the lot depth can't be 2.5 times greater than the lot width. So then you could make an argument, truthfully, that maybe the planning board does have the authority to waive for a flag lot because it's under design standards, and it's, even though they don't meet the minimum lot width. That's where it's like,
Yeah.
you have,
Subjective.
it's so crazy.
And lots are not all rectangles.
Oh, no,
They
far
are
from it.
not all rectangles. Some of them are
Well, we know.
round.
So that's in here, in this section here, 174.7 under this general, just trying to help clarify it, but this was majority of my week last week, was chasing sections of the code between the two interpretation applications I filed. And it's not clear. It's really not.
Personally, I don't have a problem with flag lots. I mean, there's certain lots that the only way you can develop, put a house, is you gotta put it behind. I mean, it's not the most desirable in terms of looking at the back of somebody else's house, but flag lots, as long as you have a certain access, the footage along a public road and
Enough footage to provide
a drive.
a driveway.
Yeah.
That has safe access. I concur.
So why don't we define lots as you have to have a minimum length of road frontage?
We do.
We do that.
It's
Mhm.
called
Well,
lot
Lot
frontage.
frontage.
Yeah, but that's
But
whatever
where-
the width of the lot has to be at the building. That's the 225.
Right,
That's what
where-
came in.
Absolutely.
Dugway
Where
Road.
is the frontage?
Yeah.
Where can you put it?
And then the frontage being.
What kind of road is it on?
Absolutely, right.
But generally, there's been over the years, this direction, I would say, that the town of Canandaigua doesn't want to allow flag lots. So if you guys want to change that, then we should update the code.
I think certain zoning districts cry out for it.
Why wouldn't we allow flag lots?
You know,
What is the
Yeah.
concept of not wanting to allow them?
It increases density.
Well, I don't think that that's accurate statement necessarily, Adeline. Because now, let's just take the scenic view shed. They have to have a minimum of 1 acre lots for the development. And then we have other areas which are SCR2s that have to have 2 acres and 3 acres, right?
Mhm.
So the density really isn't based on how much road frontage they have. It's based on how many acres they have, right?
I mean, you could stack up
Yeah.
15-foot wide strips going up to, you know, a number of lots. You have land, housing built along a road, and then there's open land behind it. You could take 10, 15-foot wide strips, so everybody has access on their own driveway or whatever you want to call it. And they have 1 acre because you've got enough acreage behind there to do it. So your density is,
Well, Sunset Ridge,
well, again,
you're
some
gonna
places
get
cry
essentially
out
flag
for
lots.
greater density.
Because you
so that
got
you're not
those-
going
Those ones
into
on
the
that
ag
private
district.
drive. Excuse me, I'm sorry. You've got those 3 lots
On
with
both
20 foot
sides.
of
Mhm.
frontage on this public street that are using a
Private
private
drive.
drive, subject to a maintenance and ownership easement. But essentially they're flag lots,
They are.
but they get away with because they put it on a private drive. And it's 3 lots or less, or it's less than 4 lots.
But that's part of an overall subdivision that's greater than 4 lots.
That's true. That's correct.
So if this was in place, they wouldn't be able to do that. Because at that point, if this was wordsmith correctly, and this was in place of what we're trying to do, they're creating more than 4 lots. They would all have to be public streets. They couldn't do it on a private drive.
That's what this,
You're right.
that's what this.
Cumulatively,
I'm
Yes.
looking at, but there's only 3 lots using,
the private.
even though it's
drives.
part of a
But it's part of a
19 lot
subdivision.
subdivision.
Right.
At the lower section, there's 3 lots that are using this private, only 3 lots using this private drive. The rest of them will have frontage on public street.
Right, but this would still prohibit that because it's part of the overall subdivision. Now, that's a perfect example. Do
That's
you
a-
want to allow that?
Well, that's a good, right.
Can we pull up
That's a really good.
the Dugway
thought.
example?
Sure.
Because that's, I think, a very illustrative example of what we're talking about, isn't it?
What's that,
Just go to Encore. and
I don't know what the
Okay.
zoning
It
is
might be
there.
the
Yeah,
easiest
but-
way.
3 acre.
So that's 3 acres or more.
Which they have. Yeah, they have a 3,
Yeah.
even with the subdivision. It's a big lot.
I think it's 18 acres.
Yeah, it's the residual,
yeah.
And the other,
the
the
house
little
lot
lot
is like
is,
over 3 acres and the residual is 15.
That's one you guys have seen and
I don't know if
Well,
you
I
can
think
figure-
Doug has drafted some language that we're reviewing now, that the zoning board has to make a determination on the code inspector's determination,
Okay.
code enforcement officer's
no, it was my
determination.
determination.
Yours?
Yeah, zoning officer. There they are.
Yeah. right
That's
here.
it right
So
there.
here's the situation. So you've got,
You can share that if at all possible.
oh, sorry. Yes, give me 1 second.
There she is.
Thank you.
I said like, okay. So this parcel right here,
Can you just arrow it up a little bit, Doug, so you can see the
yeah. I will.
Dugway Road?
Let me just back out here for a second.
There you go.
Okay, so it's this parcel that they're trying to subdivide. And they're claiming access along this parcel. Which you see doesn't touch,
Subject parcel.
it doesn't touch the subject parcel because that parcel's in between. So so the blue parcel is in between the subject parcel that they're trying to subdivide and their actual access. So they don't actually have road frontage along a private drive, in my opinion.
Where does that go, the blue eventually? Is that just that teeny little strip or does it go out to a flag?
There's
No,
a
they're
bigger
flag
lot in the
lots.
back.
See, if they're flag lots back in the back. These are classic flag lots.
That's why we should not have flag lots.
So now, if the person that owns the blue wanted to subdivide that into 3 lots, we're saying that he cannot do it because it's a flag lot?
If that, how much property is there?
They'd have to put in a town approved road, correct?
Only if he did
Not
4.
with-
No,
Three.
that's not correct.
Great, okay.
26 acres, so, and it's RR3, so yeah, he
3
could
acres.
subdivide. He could subdivide along that because he has his private drive, so he could subdivide the blue. Now, when you do that determination, I'll file an interpretation 174-19E, but
And if in theory, they wanted to subdivide into more than 3 lots, that access in blue would have to be large enough to sustain a public right roadway that meets town standards,
yes, a public street,
a public street that
Yes.
met town standards.
yes.
Otherwise, they couldn't subdivide in greater than 3 unless they got relief from the planning board or the zoning board.
Correct.
Just so
So-
we're all, I'm saying that just so we're all on the same page, because
And that part of Dugway is still in the town of Canandaigua, correct?
Yes, this is all done.
So then-
We wouldn't be looking.
Well, and that's my other question though. What happens if like, I mean, what if somebody was starting off of Dugway outside of the town of Canandaigua and continuing into a subdivision that was inside the town of Canandaigua? I mean, that's just down the road there.
No, so the parcels are usually split at the municipal boundary, excluding the situation with the city. They're usually, so you see the parcels, they're actually separate parcels on each side of the purple line.
Yeah, okay.
Has Mr. DeMarco provided a copy of the easement that he keeps referring to?
yet.
no,
I mean, that's what you gotta read. You gotta read who has rights to that easement
Yeah.
and what
Right,
rights do they
right,
have.
and then you could probably do it.
Yeah, I mean, maybe hit that lot that he wants to subdivide has rights to
it's a
that
certain
easement, even though
dimension.
it doesn't touch it.
It has to be a certain width, right?
No, not
Not-
necessarily, no.
if there's more than,
Oh, for just
3.
one.
There's
For-
nothing that defines a private right of way in terms of the width.
Okay, but John's, if
access.
come 3 years later, they want to put 3 lots up there.
he could do it. 4 lots,
Well, wait. Let's say their right of ways presently is 10 feet wide. He
Yes.
couldn't,
he could put 3.
10 feet wide?
For a right of way?
Yeah.
Mhm, there's no
There's no
definition of.
definition. He could
Wherever
do that.
the parties
So we don't
come up
have
with.
any, again, going to Linda, the dilemma there, or
That is what it is. I mean,
Well,
unless the town
yeah.
invests to bring that up to standards. I
The
can't
design
imagine
standards
it's gonna happen.
talk about the width of the road, they don't talk about the right of way itself, they don't actually define the right of way.
Yeah.
But if you're gonna put a 14-foot road, you gotta have at least 14-foot of
So Doug,
common right of way.
if this is a flag lot and they could develop it up to 3 or maybe more, if, as long as they meet particular standards. To your comment that we are discouraging flag lots. What does that mean?
Our current code. So you were asking. could
So
they
in other words, you're saying if they wanted to subdivide land
Mhm,
to create a flag lot,
correct,
we frown upon that. We don't encourage that.
correct. So the town code 174-19E says the lot depth can't be greater than 2.5 times the lot width. So if the width is 20 feet at the road, it could be a maximum of 60 feet deep. And you see that's way.
Now, if you create that now or into the future,
Current code.
Right, currently.
Current code,
One
right.
seventy-four
We
nineteen.
can't create one that's like the in excess of what you just said.
Correct.
But
Unless it's
there
either
are many
conservation-
lots,
Oh,
that
there's
are
tons of pre-existing.
pre-existing non-conforming conditions. Okay.
And then.
How wide
obviously-
are those 3 lots at Dugway Road?
Not very far.
20 feet.
Is that what they are?
Yeah,
20
they're each
yeah.
20 feet.
And then the planning board always has the flexibility under conservation subdivisions or great flag lots.
So to me, it doesn't sound like we need to review the language of the flag lots. I mean, everybody concur with that?
Unless you allow flag lots, then you have to change
Then that would have
that
to
provision
change.
about the 2.5 times.
Yeah, I don't see the need to want to do that.
We don't need any more.
Don't need any more than we already had, right?
I know, I create. I mean, if you could go back in time, you would have applied this before and you wouldn't have as many as we do now. Those are each 20 feet wide to 3.
They are,
Okay.
yeah.
That's
So the guy that back property doesn't touch on his because his is the middle one.
Right, DeMarco owns the middle, not the one
But if he,
adjacent to his
So
parcel.
then
he
he-
owns with the other guy.
He owns
You could
this.
switch,
But
right,
it's not tied.
But
to
that
the
one
lot,
goes-
the subject lot, it's tied to the lot
but
that's
that
above it.
other
Right.
one
So
next to it goes
just,
up.
he conveniently owns the middle
the-
part, but it's not related to the lot, the subject lot that we're talking about.
And that right there illustrates the problem with flag lots is, what that middle person wants is not going to be, it's going to be greatly affected by what the 2 people on either side decide to do. So
Well, it seems to me that those landowners need to come together for the mutual benefit of both parties.
yeah, and grant a common easement to one another or something.
Right. It seems like
Especially
this,
since there's only one drive that's shared between all of them currently anyway. They
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
need to record it and then.
right.
Yeah, just
Right.
acknowledge a common easement.
We sort of put burden on Mr. DeMarco, it's, you gotta go out and get the right of access for that lot.
that
I
one.
was
And prove it
just
to us.
told last week that he's in the process of getting it, but.
Good.
we're
I
still-
think there might be a new plan in my email this morning.
Gotcha.
So then,
Now, his application before the planning board also includes a post of a flag that comes down to Dugway, and it's what, 30 feet this time? The one that went to the ZBA was like 60 feet. I think it's 30 feet, right? It's a 30-foot strip that comes from that back lot that comes down. Now, that would essentially have its own access from Dugway of 30 foot wide, going back to the back lot. And he wouldn't have to use the, the access with the common drive. So, but it really doesn't serve any purpose because he doesn't have 225 feet on a, which is
For frontage.
the
Wow.
requirement currently.
that's
So
the
everybody
part
has-
right there that I don't quite understand. Because you just talked about the frontage being a restriction.
It is.
Well, let's take that lot in yellow. Frontage isn't a restriction there, right?
Which one in yellow, the one
The
closest to
the one up
road?
on top.
This one.
Oh,
Yes.
So that one is clearly a flag lot
That's
and the only
pre-existing.
access is down here. So that's a pre-existing non-conforming lot.
with his 20 feet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So then the frontage doesn't come into play here for
No.
that particular
No.
lot.
Now, if he wanted to, what size is that? That's, if he wanted to further subdivide that parcel in the future, hypothetically. Let's say he wants to, and there's a private drive that comes back. And he wants to turn this, what is it, to 26 acres. He wants to turn that into, he wants to create 3 lots there.
Yep.
And he's got probably more than enough road frontage that he needs to do along the private drive. He could do boom, 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 and create 3 lots.
So then you're saying frontage is still an issue.
Well, frontage is, or the lot width is measured at the street line or at the right of way is actually whatever word it uses in the code. So we're saying that you can subdivide along a private drive.
Mhm.
So the blue line hypothetically is the private drive. Let's say right where the cursor is, that drive goes all the way up to the edge, the northern edge of the property. That's the private drive. And he could then take that 26 acres and create 3 9-acre parcels.
Mhm.
He could do that
With 225 feet of frontage.
each,
No.
right? Mhm.
No. Hmm?
See, I'd also be concerned about emergency vehicles in this area. That's, 3 different driveways that would be crossing that blue line stream. I just, it's not, well, it's neither here nor there. We're not reviewing one particular property here, but yeah, I have a lot of concern about that.
There are New York State regulations that kick in relative to subdivision. Once you exceed a certain threshold, that 3 is below that threshold. And then you have to have emergency fire access, et cetera, et cetera. It's once you hit that 5, then that's when you need them.
And we're saying once you hit 4, it's got to meet those,
Yes,
basically.
yes, yes. Hi.
Hello,
Are you here for the conservation team meeting?
I am
It's going to be in this room at 10. So.
at 10, so
Yes.
I'll wait out here.
Sure, okay. Yeah, so then the other thing that kicks into play with that though is, let's hypothetically say there's this one drive that, well, let's just talk that out for a second, exactly what you just said, John. So this parcel, let's say this gentleman decide he wants to build 2 lots here. Let's say he does another lot up here. You got 2 lots here, so now there's 3 along this private drive. This private drive comes back and this guy wants to build 3 houses back here, right? Well, now because it's greater than 4 along that, he's got to upgrade this entire thing to a public street. Because he's at the cumulative 4.
With different owners.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then, but it's all, the burden's going to be on him.
Hmm.
And then that'll also mirror New York state laws. Once you hit the 5, then that's when all that public access and all that stuff kicks in. So you would have to do that anyway.
And that's assuming that the easement agreement they have with the other property owners allows for the subdivision
Yes.
on that back lot too. They might say it should never be subdivided. That's why it's important that we get into doing more research on some of these easement documents to see what's allowed and what's not. Because right now, a developer comes in, he says, I have an easement across the property. You have no idea what that allows him to do and,
Right.
and
Yeah.
who's involved in the maintenance. And so we've been asking for having Chris review the easement documents as part of any situation where there's a private driveway involved for easement.
Yeah, you got a crazy situation. You got that one on Middle Cheshire Road with Jeremy's property where you had that farm road easement that goes behind Gray Bennett's house. And got ruts this deep in and out. It was his yard, he thought. Any crazy situations out there. Oh, no.
I don't think we're ever going to create code though to cover every
No.
single situation, but if we can cover the majority of them, that's what we're looking to do, right?
Well, that's why with on Linda, we're trying to tie that down a little more, with Westbrook's application that, that common driveway that's used by many people, that it'd be more defined, more tied down in terms of who's responsible for what.
Well, we got the same situation on the other side of the lake, right?
Oh, yeah. Well, you've got it all along the lake,
Yeah.
all those side roads.
Right, all those side roads.
Landing Road, but we're talking about new.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So is there anything else we need to talk about relative to this, Doug? Or,
Let us work on some more wordsmithing and get it back to you. Unfortunately, again, I mean,
Okay.
it's just, and I think that we're gonna have to do some more definition work. We can move that easement thing over to definition. That's
Well,
not a
when
problem,
I looked
but-
at that, when I printed it, it didn't print in red, and it may be down in the new definition of private drive, so we should have that reference to include recorded easements. I had set up in the private right away, but maybe a private drive should be unmaintained, certainly through if you're providing access to public and subject to an easement. Recorded easement.
Access, when you say access to public right of way or street perhaps? Because we define
Well, there's
public
already.
right of way and we define street.
Yeah, well, and we were very careful when we went through that wording. Let me just say I'll relook at it,
Yeah.
because it was very specific, the words that we were using.
And the other thing is consistent in terms of, we have the shared driveway. I think definitely, you brought that up last meeting, that there was that provision about a shared driveway, which essentially is a
The,
driveway of 4 or less lots.
yeah, he brought up access control, so we put that in here. That's this 22075, that section of access control. So the streets, that's in 17421 A1 and access control 22075 of town code.
Okay.
So we put that right there so that it has to meet both. And then the other thing that this does is it struck 229D and just reference 220-9, meaning that it's got to be applicable to the whole chapter, obviously.
Does June 6th give you enough time to,
Yeah. We'll get something out this week.
okay? Anything else we need to talk about on this particular topic? The other thing that Shauna and I talked about was creating this potential future topics list. Did everybody get one of those? And did I just hear waivers by planning board as being a topic that needs to be added to this?
We're starting in 10 minutes. We just have another, you're good. It is in 10 minutes. Thanks, Karen.
Doug, I see you shaking your head. Yes, we
Yes,
should.
I think it does. I mean, there's a piece of it that I think will end up needing a little bit of discussion under the subdivision of land, but I do think the waiver piece is something that needs to be brought up. I mentioned at the zoning board meeting last week, there's a zoning schedule for the, which one is it? It was for Dugway, so it was RR3, that
Yes,
there's specifically,
there's
there's
a
no
dash.
dimensions, it's a dash line. That zoning schedule, I think we need to either look at or at least refer that back to the board, but it would
Okay.
probably be good for this.
We put that on the list, right?
Yeah, let's put that on there. I think we should look at all of them.
And then,
just to make
yeah, I
sure.
think that would be good. The incentive zoning one, we might need a little, if you could give that some priority attention, that one, I think we're gonna have something.
why I
that
put
the
it on the
board's
top.
Gonna need to, yeah.
Do you want that as the next
Yeah,
Okay.
I don't
Okay.
think that I have
June
any
6th? Incentive zoning?
priority as
Okay.
to what we talked about first.
That is our next meeting, you said 6/6, right?
6-6.
John, are you referring that to the to-do list we had?
I don't,
I know
I
yours
don't have
used to have
that.
a spreadsheet.
and Shauna didn't.
We have it, we kind of keep it
Okay,
internally and we've pulled from it
okay.
and from other topics that have come up.
Well, maybe with new committee members and a reorganization that we at least all can look at what we're aiming toward.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
could send that out. It's okay with you?
Yeah, no, I agree. That's what we were attempting to do, is just reconstruct.
Yeah,
the-
it's more, it is the spreadsheet, but more in a, Word document, but if you would,
And then if we want, in the future, we can prioritize this. But right now, it's not in any
I
particular
don't
order.
recall getting that, but no problem.
We'll make sure you get one.
I didn't get it either.
No, what John's referring.
oh,
Yeah,
it's,
yeah.
oh, sorry,
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
We just got it this
gentlemen.
morning.
Oh, I didn't.
I, we didn't, it didn't
Oh,
That
okay.
explains it.
come around,
Holding out.
Yeah,
sorry.
Um,
Can you make sure I get an email on that? I probably did, but
You didn't. I'll put it in your box or on your desk, Adeline.
okay, thanks.
When you're redoing definitions, lot line, comma, front, I was trying to envision how you would have a lot line fronting and a public right of way. What's a public right of way? I can see on a street.
There's
Well,
actually a
one of-
definition.
One of the
Right.
suggestions we had was adding under lot line front, adding public or private right of way to that definition.
That's what I'm looking at,
Yeah.
but I just couldn't envision a public right of way. Isn't it a street if it's a public right of way? Or another public right of way would be a utility line. or
It would,
something.
that's what I was gonna
But-
say,
but
the other.
You wouldn't want to call that a lot front if it fronted on a utility right of way, which would be a public right of way.
Yeah, no, there's definition of right of way, and then A is private right of
Well, I
way,
was gonna say
B
there's
is
two.
public right of way. So A, private right of way, land owned by a non-public agency or organization occupied or intended to be occupied by transmission mains, gas pipelines, rails, or special uses. Public right of way, land owned by public agencies for use as street or other public purposes.
Would
So
it
it's
be-
actually currently defined.
Would it be helpful to go over this at the next meeting? Because I have a few comments on this myself, and I think that's what Tom is looking at.
I'm good with street, but lot line comma front is the definition I'm looking at.
He's looking at this. here.
Your revised lot line front where you're referring to.
Yeah, but that's
a-
not what this draft is that's in front of you, because we
He's
need to
looking
go
at the other
through
one.
this. This
Yeah.
was something that Chris and Shauna had put together. That we didn't actually, this was never put into any version of a draft. or
No, it's a proposal, and I'm just
Mhm.
suggesting
Well, what about this? Doug?
we,
That's the
That's
same.
it.
That
what-
wasn't actually, that's not part of the proposed law.
Should we review this in conjunction with this subdivision
Well,
conversation?
let us go through that.
Yeah, we were-
and then
that's our
we'll put
plan.
Something, we'll go through
What
and
are
see
you
which
showing, John?
pieces of that we think we need, and if there's something else.
The
then-
Why
There
don't-
are some
There are,
that,
I have some questions on this, so
okay,
maybe you could give me a call and we could talk about that as you're doing it,
okay.
because what are you looking at? This thing.
Wasn't this page and a half
Definitions.
a revision of
This
what
is
that was?
definition.
I'm
Yes.
looking,
Yeah.
I'm looking.
And you're gonna take out another stuff.
This is definitions.
Back
So I
in
think
May.
Doug's coming up with a
That's right out of the code.
further improvement
Copy of
of
it.
a third rendition.
Yeah, unfortunately, but yes.
First rendition is by the wayside.
But there's some pieces of the.
There's
first
some that we
may
need to pull in from the first to the second into a third.
One of the things though, and I was talking to Nat, like for instance, let me just share with you real quick. So private drive and private driveway. Okay, so now I see you saying need, but private drive is defined in New York State Building Code. Private driveway is defined in our town code. We don't necessarily need to repeat what's defined in building code for the purposes of construction, which a lot of times is what Chris Jensen confuses. We
That
need
does
what's-
happen a lot.
It does.
You're right.
What we need is private driveway because that's defined in our town code, not private drive. So just little things like that. That's why I say I want to go through it in more detail.
But what
We
happens,
define driveway, we define cross access driveway and
Yes.
shared driveway.
Yes, we do.
what happens
need all
when
three.
It might be a
building
common
code
Yeah.
then causes a problem with the
Anything
zoning
goes.
definitions?
All
You
the
know what I'm
above.
saying?
This
As
is-
it works
should-
its way, it shouldn't
building
ever.
code. Building code will then mean that a permit will not be issued.
You good?
Oh, yeah.
Till the sixth?
We're never good.
So
It's
June-
like-
me?
June
Yeah.
6th.
Yes,
We're
June
getting
6th.
more confused than when
Yeah.
you came in.
You got a lifetime job here.
Okay, good.
Job stability.
Let's see everybody on the sixth, right?
Thanks, everybody. I'll see you on the
Thank
sixth.
you.
Thanks.
June.
Can I